Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this pre-recorded roundtable on independent cinema in Cuba and China. My name is Dunja Fehimović. I'm a senior lecturer in Hispanic Studies at Newcastle University in the UK, and a researcher of, amongst other things, Cuban cinema. And I'm very excited to be here today with my colleague, Professor Sabrina Yu, who I'm going to hand over to in just a moment, and four fantastic filmmakers from Cuba and China. And we're going to have hopefully a free-flowing comparative discussion and sharing of experiences around independent cinema today with our filmmakers. So I'm going to hand over to Sabrina, and then we're going to ask our filmmakers to introduce themselves. Sabrina?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sabrina Qiong, and like Dunia, I'm also working in Newcastle University here in the UK. In the recent year, my research interest has been on Chinese independent cinema, and in the past 5.5 years, I led to establish the Chinese independent film archive here in Newcastle with the UK Research Council's grant help. And so here we want to bring two countries, independent filmmakers together, who both kind of have to work under film censorship. And we thought it's a really good opportunity for filmmakers from these two nations or cultural contexts to have some dialogue, exchange strategies, ideas. So yeah, I think this is a great opportunity here, and probably we hand over this to the filmmakers. But I think the idea is we would just initiate some discussion by asking some question. But really, we want you filmmakers to respond to each other directly, probably ask questions to each other as well. Yeah, we are just here as a kind of moderator. Okay, thank you. Let's start with Chinese filmmaker, with Wang To.
Hi everyone. My name is Wang To. So yeah, I'm a visual artist based in Beijing right now. I do paintings and video installations, and sometimes it's you can call it film. Yeah. So basically my subject matter is about the modern history in East Asia. And 2 years ago, I had a piece. It's called The Second Interrogation. That piece is about my experience dealing with the cultural censorship in China, because that's a big thing here in China. And I'd like to share more thoughts and ideas with you later. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Comes back to me. So, okay, thank you, To. Can Feng now introduce yourself, please?
刚才从哪儿介绍？要自我介绍一下。对，其实我这2天其实一直在看王拓的电影，感谢于琼给我分享你的片子，我非常喜欢。我觉得能看到这么大胆的、这么好的创作。然后我其实完全不一样，我出身跟影像完全一点没有关系。我是在94年在日本上学的时候，那阵儿开始接触到小机器。小的那个超8的那个录像机，从那儿开始，然后看了一些纪录片之后开始拍纪录片的，是这样。然后这些年我一直在做的一个比较长期的题材，就是我拍了一些因为三峡水库移民的那个长江沿岸的那些女人。拍了那些，其实一开始的时候并没有想有意识的拍女性，但是后来拍到后边，发觉好像我特别感兴趣，或者我有比较有深入交流的都是一些女生，所以就是一直在拍她们。除此之外，当然还有一些别的，最主要的是关于一些女性的人生故事，等于是这样的。我现在还在做一些后期的工作。
Okay. So I will translate. Hello, everyone. I'm Feng, and first of all, I would like to thanks for Wang Tuo's film, and thanks for Sabrina for sharing this film to her. I'm really glad to see these kind of like bold films produced in China. So my path of creating the independent films is a little bit different. I started to make the independent film in Japan in 1994. At that time, when I was in school, I started to come into contact with small machines such as the Super 8. And then I began to watch some documentaries, and I began to make my own documentaries. One of the long-term things that I've been doing these years is I filmed some of the migration women near the Three Gorge Dam project. So it's near Chongqing city. And when I was made my independent films and documentaries there, I began to have a huge interest on the women there. And then I began to consciously shoot women and women's life. And I found that I'm particularly interested in, or I have more in-depth communication with some of the women's. So I just keep filming them. And in addition, another important thing is about the women's life stories. And now I'm still doing some of the editing and translation work. Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to invite now our Cuban filmmakers to introduce themselves, maybe starting with José Luis.
Okay, thank you, Dunja. Thanks everybody for being here and for the invitation. Well, I am José Luis Aparicio, a Cuban filmmaker, mainly director and writer. I've done some fiction and documentary short films, and now I'm preparing my first feature film. And I also have written about cinema in different magazines and created curation projects regarding Cuban independent cinema. And right now, I am the artistic director of the INSTAR Film Festival. So I also do this curating job on the side. And yeah, very happy to be here to share also my experiences of making independent films in Cuba with you and learning from your experiences.
Hi everyone. Well, I'm Alejandro Yero. I'm also a Cuban filmmaker. I did some short films during the cinema school. Later last year, I made my first feature film. I made for the moment documentaries, and also teach cinema in Cuba and other places abroad Cuba. I mainly direct and write documentaries. And that's all. I will share my experience in my last year with you during this conversation. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. The first prompt that Sabrina and I have is around this key term of independent cinema that we're all talking about today. So we know that independence means different things to different people in different cultural and political contexts. So we'd like to invite our filmmakers to reflect on what making independent cinema means for them. Do you consider yourself an independent filmmaker? Why not? Why did you choose this pathway? How would you understand that concept in relation to Cuba, China, and their diasporas? Thank you.
Who should start? Well, maybe I can start myself. Well, in the case of Cuba, I don't know if it's similar to China, because they are both, I don't know how to say it, countries with a system, a government that identifies itself as communist or socialist. Although I don't think if the politics are really in tune with those ideologies all of the time. But I think, for example, in the case of Cuba, the label independent has been very demonized and prosecuted, not only in the case of cinema, but in the case of everything in general, and specifically in art. Everything that is independent is outside of the state control, is outside of the state machine, and in a totalitarian state like Cuba, that's dangerous. That's something that that has always been seen through a lens of being outside of the law, right? And since I grew up, like understanding yourself as doing something independently, whatever you decided to do, was something that could bring problems to you. But I think that was also something that was appealing, at least for me, because in a place like Cuba, from an early age, you can maybe determine that you are not in a space of freedom. You feel that in the family, then within the school, then within the social world in general. You feel that there are certain things that you cannot say or that you cannot do, and if you want to be an artist, a filmmaker, you need freedom to express yourself. You need to have the to set your own boundaries, not work within the boundaries set by an institution or a censor or something like that. So I think that when I wanted to make cinema at the start, I was in love with cinema. I wasn't trying to be an independent filmmaker. But I think that thinking myself inside of a cultural context like Cuban cinema, I always took pride in thinking of myself as an independent filmmaker, because that meant to be a filmmaker with an ethic and an aesthetic pursuits that were different from that state cinema that I was not identified with. I never, except from, of course, there are filmmakers that I got an interest in certain points of my life that were part of this state cinema, but mainly all of the filmmakers and also artists in general from the Cuban culture, I identify myself more with these alternative artists, people that were sometimes censored or forced into exile, or films, in this case, that were made inside the state institution, but that were censored or marginalized or poorly distributed. So I found myself that closer to that tradition. And of course, if that meant more freedom, if that meant like taking a stand against some things that weren't right for me, I always took pride in that sense of feeling myself as independent. But it was not something that I chose deliberately. It was something that I was drawn to because of what I wanted to do and the freedom I needed for doing that. I don't know if Yero wants to expand on something on that.
Yeah, well, I will be really honest about that thing of independent cinema. I think some way as Jose, I never thought myself as independent filmmaker. I just wanted to make films. That's what that I wanted to do. Films in the way I desire or the way I thought. But unfortunately, the country where we born and we grow up has a very, very teeny opportunities to the kind of films that we are interested in for political reasons, for production reasons, even in aesthetic reasons. Let's say in the country we are Cuba. We have the Cuban Cinema Institute, let's say the official or the state institution to receive fundings or to receive support or to receive in some way protection, as many countries around the world that they have their own national institute that protect their filmmakers. But unfortunately, in Cuba, of course, political is like very present in every aspect of their life, and the freedom and what you can say or what you can do is very teeny. So when you have other desires, you just want to make film, and you just want to make or talk about some themes. Of course, is not the place to make cinema. Let's say I some way how to say, because my first films, my documentary film, my short films, was made during the cinema school in Cuba. That in some way is some space of freedom in the context of Cuba, the cinema school. And many of the Cuban filmmakers made their first works there in that place. And the place is international school. It has its own opportunity, identity, but in some way receive funding from the Cuban Institute. So I always try to find a place where I can be free, I can make the films that I want to do in that moment. And let's say I from very early, it was very clear for me that I have to find my own strategies, my own networks, my own resources, because let's say the only support that as a Cuban filmmaker you can receive in Cuba is from the cinema school. That of course is in some way when you are in as a student or whatever. But for a lot of other Cuban filmmakers, there's any opportunity, and they have to go outside Cuba or find other strategies. In some way, I was protected during my time as a filmmaker student, where I have all the opportunity, all the freedom to talk whatever I want and make the films that I want to do. But after I got graduated, of course, I was alone. And my first documentary that it was shot in Russia, it was completed by my own and by my friends and my networks of people gathering around the world. Most of them meet in the cinema school, that's International Cinema School in Cuba. And I think that for me, I never thought myself as an independent filmmaker. I just want to make films in the way I want to do. For me was to find the places and the resources and the friends that for me were essential to make the film. So for me, that in very general way, as a presentation, my experience as a Cuban filmmaker that has to most of the time work in independent way.
Thanks, Tuo. Or Yen, would you like to respond to this question?
对我来说，因为我完全是用小机器开始起步的，基本就是开始的时候是一个人在工作，所以对我来说，其实独立这个词一开始就不得不独立。就是他一开始的时候完全是自己。我觉得有对我来说有2个意义，一个是精神上的，一个是精神上的，就是没有任何人来要求我做这件事儿，都是我自己想去做的。然后呢，再有一个在经济上完全是我自己找钱，我自己做别的工作来挣到钱，然后拍自己想拍的东西。所以这一点我觉得从这点来说，如果说是独立，可能是独立吧，但是可能跟刚才大家讲的那个独立还不太一样。我觉得对我来说，可能那种独立，就是我跟刚才那个导演一样，就是不太意识到我是一个什么独立的导演，这个身份，我觉得这个就是我在选题的时候，或者是我想拍什么的时候，我觉得最重要的是跟自我有关的，就是我自己特别感兴趣或者我自己特别共情的东西，我去拍，我拍的都是我想要拍的东西，所以我觉得从这点上来讲，可能这是一个比较狭义上的独立吧。你是不是要先翻一下？
Okay, I will translate the first part. So as for me, because when I began to make independent films, I did it all alone, like all on myself and with very small machines. So therefore, independence for me has 2 meanings. The first is that I'm spiritually independent, because I made films just on my own interest, just on my own desires to make a film. And secondly, I'm financially independent, because I just do some like other work to earn myself money and then to make my own films. So in these 2 senses, I think you might identify me as independent filmmakers. But I think what independence for me is a little bit different to the independence at the context at the moment. And I also think I'm a little bit like the Cuban filmmakers they just talked before, because for me, I don't really realize I'm independent. I just want to make the films I like and that I'm particularly sympathetic to. So yeah, so I think I'm more like an independent filmmaker in a narrow sense.
我还接着可以说吧。 然后就是说，现在其实在中国，独立这个词，是非常相对来讲的。在中国，这个独立电影这个词儿是，它又敏感，而且它往往被赋予了比较政治性的意义。但是呢，就是我现在有很多，跟我几乎差不多同时代开始拍纪录片的人，他们也有很。我觉得现在也有一些导演，就是拍一些片子，拍一些比较就是怎么说呢，可能没有可能通过审查的片子，但是呢，就是我觉得其实最重要的独立，对我来说，独立最重要的就是你能讲出自己想讲的话，不管你是否拿到资金，我觉得这个是一个很重要的一个区别吧，对我来讲。有一些导演他也在民间啊，或者很多地方他拿到赞助了，但是他拍的东西不见得能够公映，在国内不能公映，或者是拿不到龙标，他其实也是一个相对的被排除在内，被整个的那个正统的体系排除在外的一种表达吧。这些我觉得对我来说，它也意味着某种独立。
Okay, so I'll start from the very beginning. So in fact, in the context of China, the word independence is very like relatively speaking, because in China, independent films always has its political meaning. But you know, I have like a lot of filmmakers who just like me, at the same moment, they just want to make their own films. And then as about funding, some of them, they got funding from external funders, and their films, they does not go through the censorship process, and they does not get the dragon seal or the dragon label that the China State Film Council require if you want to show your screen openly. So as for me, the most important thing about independence is that you can say what you want to say, whether you get funding or not. So I think that's a very important thing. So even if you get funding, but if you cannot get the dragon seal or the dragon label, you are still excluded from the mainstream discourse. So I think for me, that also means a kind of independence.
Hi. Yeah, I totally agree with Madam Feng's words about how we define the independence in China, because individualism is not very encouraged here in China, because if you wanna emphasize the individualism, or the independence, so you must be, independent from something, from the system, right? So that's a very sensitive topic in China. But for my own experience as an artist, so after several years of my career in biology, so I decided to switch my career into art. But art, to me, back then was just about painting. So basically, in China, the art world actually is also divided into two parts. Like one part is the mainstream parts. That's basically that's propaganda. That's socialist realism. So the other part, the Chinese contemporary art, used to be totally underworld, used to be the independent art world. So so my training at the very beginning, actually, that's propaganda art. That's socialist realism art. So yeah, we need to go out to do the live paintings, the live drawings of the soldiers or the farmers or the workers in the factory. So basically that's a very typical USSR propaganda type of painting. I believe Cuba, probably you used to have the similar thing. I don't know. So that's a totally another system. That type of painting used to be shown in the National Museum, and that's also the idea of art to most of people in China. And then I don't know if it's just after you're seeing too much, or you learn too much, or maybe it's just an intuition. It just triggered you to think about something more. Think about different medias, and think about different subject matters, and think about why at the very first something as a driven force to make you to do art, So in China, we can see a lot of things that's quite bizarre. You see something great, and you see something strange, and you see a lot of things they're fighting against each other, and you start to think about, okay, probably there's something wrong with the system, and you want to try to solve this dilemma and try to give a solution. I don't know, but I think that's a driven force for me to think about something more. I want to record the reality, and I want to criticize it, and I want to provide a little bit more of I personally I just believe that art could be a part of the history of ideas, and it could also be something as a part of the progress of the history. And so basically right now even the underground art world is already something into the mainstream, because the underground art world or the contemporary art world is very commercial right now. So commercial is very encouraged here in China, because if you're commercial, you make everything a little bit far from the political situation here. So I mean, to be independent in art or in film, I think here is quite heavy and tough, because you have to you have like a different foes. You have a different things you have to fight against. It's not just about the system. It's not just about the culture bureau or the government. You also need to fight against the system of this commercial world, and you need to try to find a way to survive, and also you need to find a way to keep yourself safe. And I think it's very difficult. But I think for the real independent filmmakers in China, I think they have a even much more difficult situations than the art world, because film industry is always like a big thing here in China. So maybe since like 70 years ago, when we just have this party, so they start to realize that that is probably the best weapon or tool for people to cultivate people, to cultivate this society. So film is a very strong tool. So they think the independent filmmakers, I bet that we usually have the Beijing Independent Film Festival, and we have the archive before, but they're all gone. They're all shut down. So people have to find a little gap or void to survive and to make things.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for your sharing of your experience, also understanding of being independent or making films, art independently. It sounds to me like a very heavy topic, because it's actually increasingly become a very hard choice. I think I don't know, I know less about Cuba, but in China, 20 years ago has been seen as a golden era of independent film making, when the DV firstly came out, as a term of 21st century. But the situation has changed a lot with what To just mentioned, the shutdown of those independent film exhibition thing. Making film independently outside of the state or mainstream commercial system become increasingly difficult. And so I think, thank you so much for sharing. I can see some similarities, but I can see some differences. I guess that's what we want to learn today. So I just want to invite you to all of you. Probably, do you have any question to ask each other after hearing what everybody has said.
But I was thinking about the difference in the control and censorship mechanisms, because in Cuba, I don't know if it is because we are a Caribbean country with different way of organizing things, but we don't have something like the Dragon Seal, for example. There is no official seal of approval from the state. I think now there are ways to recognize if a film is Cuban or not, but that's something like you need to pass a test for them to give the nationality to your film, and they give that in the state institution, in the CAIC, in the Cuban Official Cinema Institute. But I think something particularly new. But there is no way of really, the way of knowing if a film is censored or not is very slippery, it's very complicated, because there is no a stamp of approval that you get or you don't get. And sometimes there is not even like a piece of paper that says your film is censored. It's something that is sometimes spoken of in a communicate, or something that you're told of from a festival. I don't know, sometimes not directly even, it's not published sometimes. So it's this way of that there is not an organization of censorship in Cuba. It happens all the time, but it's not that well structured. But nonetheless, this commercial aspect that you were talking about right now, as we still don't have this development of an industry there are no cinemas in Cuba that are not controlled by the state. So then they don't need a stamp of approval, because if they don't want to put your film in a cinema, you're not able to rent the cinema, to have a personal cinema and do it. You need to get an alternative space for doing this, like maybe someone's house sometimes, because it's not that easy also to have like an alternative space with the required conditions to make an independent screening. But I was thinking about that, about those differences, the way the censorship is structured, but the control they have, and like there is no also this way of escaping through a commercial is not that much of an option for us, because there is not really a market for international market interested in Cuban films. There is not an industry. So we have a state cinema that is produced by them every year. It's a very, I don't know how to say it. It's for me, it's old cinema. No? So it's a cinema that maybe the way it's made and produced and thought of, it looks like cinema from 50, 60 years ago, if we are thinking about the development of the language of cinema. And those films rarely are seen outside of Cuba. They are produced for themselves, because it's not even that the public really wants to see these films that much anymore. And these independent films that I think are circulating better in the international festivals, but they don't have the possibility of interacting, of engaging with their natural audience in Cuba, because there are not these spaces for sharing these films. And also outside of Cuba, they remain this circuit of festivals. And as we don't have like Yero said earlier, we don't have like this institute that cares and takes care of you and is really interested in promoting the cinema. We have this orphan cinema that we need to distribute ourselves, and we don't have this we don't have these powerful resources in order to get it out there to like a distribution circuit outside of festivals most of the time. But yeah, I was thinking about those differences in the way these films circulate, and also that in the sense of the spaces we had before to share these films. We used to have a film festival, only one, the Muestra Joven, the youth cinema showcase, that they celebrated like 18 editions. The 19th edition was canceled like 1 or 2 months before it should happen, because of an act of censorship. And every year, most of the years at least, there was an act of censorship against an independent film. And this space was like the state provided the money for making this festival, but it was organized by the filmmakers, by young filmmakers, young curators, young critics. And this organizing team took a stand regarding the institution and defended the films they wanted to show regarding the state institution cinema. And yeah, we don't have that space anymore because it was canceled in the 2020. Then the pandemic came and they used this excuse for not bringing it back, and I think it won't be back anytime soon, at least. And we lost this only place where every year for 1 week we could show our films in a real cinema or a traditional cinema. So yeah, I was thinking about these connections and differences.
No, I think Jose Luis say a very important word, that is orphanity. Orphan. I think all of us as generation, let's say we are the last generation of Cuban filmmakers, and I think that we born as creators in orphanity. I think there is three things that are very important for films exist. That is funding, access, and distribution. And I think that three things, funding, access, and distribution, and the solution we found, all of us in China, in Cuba, in Mexico, in so many places, in some ways, what made far from the or made in some way what it calls independent, but it's not only for the government or let's say some power centers. It's also as some of you say, with the commercial system, with the festival system, with there is a lot of circuits in some way that you became independent of them, because we as filmmakers, we need let's say the access to the world we want to shoot. That is very especially important for documentary filmmaking, the access, and also the funding, and of course the distribution, because for me it's like I can imagine all of you, it's very important that our films found their public, found the people to share, and I think that's very important. But what happened in Cuba? In Cuba, there is an industry, there is no money. The political, let's say, police is controlling a very hard way the access. There is a lot of stories in Cuba that shots that was stopped immediately by the political police, or places that you can access to shoot as a documentary or fiction filmmaker. And we didn't, for many years, we didn't have any access to funding, let's say several little support from foreign embassy, or some the very, very, very competitive international fundings, and of course the distribution. We don't have access to any of the cinemas, the very few cinemas that we have in Cuba, we don't have access. And the very few initiatives to make some to show other kind of films as youth showcase, Muestra Joven, I'd say Jose Luis, or other very, let's say, minimal initiatives. Some people in their own homes try to make a production of films. At some point, the government stopped this kind of initiative. So for us, let's say, for at least for me, from the very, very, very beginning of making film, for me it was very clear that there is in my own country the things that I have, let's say, immediately, the doors that I have immediately in front of me. For me, that from the very, very beginning, it was very clear that I won't find anything at the other side of those words, of those doors. Sorry, related to access, funding, and distribution in my own country. So, because from the very beginning, I feel like completely orphan in my own country, as many of generation. And it's not only for political reason. It's mainly for political reason, of course, mainly, but it includes economical reasons also. We don't have industry, orphan, thank you. We don't have industry in our country. We don't have like a base to make that film, because the country is in crisis for many years, many decades. So it was not even possible for the own government to create industry or to create a solid basis to make some national cinema. I was thinking that what is the main way to censorship in Cuba is the Havana Film Festival. The Havana Film Festival has become the approval of your film is not censored. And when you don't get into the Havana Film Festival, that is the official way to know that you get censored in the country. Because once again, the distribution circuit in Cuba is so poor that the Havana Film Festival is only the path to take our films to the cinema, the color zero. Yeah, exactly. So when you don't get this very teeny window, when this very teeny window don't open to you, that is the way that you get censored in the country. So orphan is the word to describe us as a generation, and we have the the advantage that we grew up with internet, with digital technology that give you access to funding, to other ways distribution, film festival, international film festival, abroad. I think that as generation, we from the very beginning found a way to fund, to distribute, to have access. Funding and distribution. We found the ways from the very beginning because of the internet and digital technology. And I think that was the path we found as generation to make films and to show our film. But it's something very important that is related to the access. Many of us, for not to say all of us, of the Cuban filmmakers of our generation, is abroad Cuba, is outside Cuba. So right now, we don't have access to our own territory. That is very, very hard that a generation don't have access to their own territory. And what is the strategy that we found is to shoot Cuba outside Cuba, because inside we don't have the access because of the control of the government of the government, and we have to shoot Cuba outside Cuba. So it's like very complicated for us and put us in front of many questions because I think that in some way we had found a path outside Cuba, but inside Cuba, how we get to the Cuban public, how to film our own country. We don't have answers right now. We are trying to or making some initiatives to, for example, in Star Film Festival, it makes a digital group of films available to be seen in Cuba, but many in Cuba connected to internet is like very expensive. So it's like a very I think that the important also keep making films, but also trying how to figure out how to get access to that territory that is forbidden right now for many of us, and especially to the Cuban public. I think that for me is very important. Make films for people watching later. So it's very hard for us that we don't have our natural public, and in some way we depend of the international film festival or the places that we let's say make in the countries and the cities abroad Cuba that right now many of us, I think every of us right now are living. I don't know in China, how is it?
It seems to me that in Cuba, very often experiences of, well, firstly, the relationship between the state institutions and what we might call independent cinema is, there's a lot more gray areas of kind of exchange and collaboration, which is exemplified by the Muestra Joven, the Young Filmmakers Showcase, that used to be this space within the State Film Institute that, you know, allowed a certain degree of kind of new critical voices. And then also seems to me that maybe compared to China, and I'd love our Chinese contributors to explain to those of us not so familiar with the system how it works, but in Cuba, it seems to me like very often censorship is almost indirect through a lack of transparency and a lack of resources. So maybe your film might be programmed, but at midnight, or nobody tells anybody that your film is being programmed, so nobody goes. Or you know, you find out that there are no resources, you can't use this camera, or you can't use, there's no funding. So yeah, that's right. Midnight maybe might be popular, but noon would not be popular. So yeah, so very indirect mechanisms of censorship quite often, as well as more direct ones. It seems to me, maybe compared to the Chinese context, but hopefully our Chinese filmmakers can explain to us a little bit how that works.
就是因为我刚才听的3位说的，我有一些混乱，我想确认几件事儿。第一就是刚才第一位那个策展人说的那个，就是你们那个审查只是盖一个章就可以了，是吗？如果要那样的话，那他审查的有哪些？他是就是他你一部影片如果最后能走进影院，在古巴，他是需要什么手续呢？我不明白，就是在古巴，你们就是刚才几位说的这个独立电影和那个独立电影，它是怎么区分的？我感觉好像和中国不太一样。就是那个我觉得在中国，就是不管你是刚才那个最后那个策展人他说的那个女士策展人他说的那个国家就是那个。独立电影就怎么区分？就是国家制作的电影和那个独立电影，那你怎么区分呢？就是那个在古巴，一种就是只要不是国家那个怎么说呢？就国家的那个机构制作电影都属于独立电影吗？就它这独立电影是怎么定义的？在古巴，这个我有点不太清楚，跟我们不太一样。我觉得在中国吧，也现在。基本都是那个，除了一些以前的国营的那个电影制片厂，现在有很多就是那种民间的那种电影公司在制作的影片。其实最重要一点，最终决定是否能上映的都是那个审查的那个龙标。那么在古巴，一个电影能进电影院，它的取决的它的条件是什么？这个我有点不太清楚。你们审查什么？比如说我看过，哎，你要不要先翻译？是不是太多了？
So I will translate. So Feng Yan has several questions to the Cuban filmmakers. So the first one, she was wondering, what is the definition, like the definite definition of Cuban independent film? Because she wants to know what is the process of getting censorship and get the kind of like seal, as you just mentioned in the chat box. And as she mentioned, like it's a little bit different in China, because in China there is also some kind of like the local companies making films. So yeah, actually she wants to know the definition and the process of independent films in Cuba. Yeah.
还有一个就是那个，比如说我看过古巴的一个就叫费尔南多·佩雷斯导演，我估计可能在古巴属于一个老导演，他拍过一个叫《Sweet Havana》一部电影，一部纪录片吧。但其实他有很多都是用剧情片的方式拍的，我非常喜欢那部电影，中文翻译成那个哈瓦那组曲啊。那部片子里，他其实还有什么异装癖，就是那个就是男生，他那个晚上他穿上高跟鞋，化妆成女的去表演啊，什么那些，我觉得在古巴好像似乎比我们都要开放很多。我不知道像这样的片子在日本，在古巴是否就直接可以那个怎么说呢？可以在电影院里公映。所以就是像这种，我觉得就是跟我们好像就是我刚才听到就是说你们说的那个就是还有那个钱的问题，比如说那个就是。独立电影，在海外发行，为什么不能它之所以不能在古巴国内发行，是因为有审查不让发行，所以才能 走出国门嘛。比如在中国，就是他现在的电影法，就是你在国内，国内你拿不到龙标，在国内不能发行的，在原则上在海外也不允许，比如说参加电影节什么的。但是在古巴没有这样的限制吗？像这种区别，我有点不太清楚。
Yeah. The other two questions. The second question she just mentioned, a well-known Cuban independent filmmaker Fernando Vélez, and his very well-known film Suel de Havana. So she's saying that film featured like a lot of like very sensitive topic, and she was wondering, can this film going into the cinema and be shown to the public? And do you count it as independent film? And the second question is about funding. So if you cannot show a film inside Cuba, how do you show it internationally? Because in China, if you cannot get the Dragon label to show it in China, you cannot also show it like internationally. So she was wondering what's the difference.
Well, I will try to answer half and half with Yero. Yeah, well, there is no seal. The coral seal was a joke I came up with because of what Yero said, that as Junior was saying, there are a lot of gray areas, so there is no real official bureaucratic way of knowing you are censored, because there is no dragon seal, there is no coral seal, there is not really a way of knowing. Like you have a piece of paper where the director of the state institution said, okay, your film is censored. So sometimes you are told in a reunion, closed doors, as it happened to me with a documentary I did in 2020 with a friend that was censored. And I got cited by the president and vice presidents of the ICAIC, the official state institution for cinema. And they told me, your film cannot be shown this way because of the way it handles these topics. So the only way we can show it is if you make particular changes that we're going to suggest. We can sit with you and say, take this out, change this, put this in. And then if we are pleased with the end result, you can show the film in this festival that doesn't exist anymore. And of course, me and the co-director, we said that we were not going to do any changes because we were happy with the film we had. And then the film was announced as it was taken out of the selection of the festival because the institution didn't want it there. But in the case of Yero, maybe he can explain it better. It was something that it was like a state of opinion that we started getting from the people that work in the Havana Film Festival, the programmers, that sometimes were indifferent with the decisions of the president of the institution. So sometimes the programmers of the Havana Film Festival want to program certain films, and they don't get the approval to do this because these films are dangerous politically for them, because they show particular things of the Cuban experience that they don't want it to be shown. So we don't have a way of really knowing we are censored. But as Yero said, getting into or not getting into the Havana Film Festival, which is the more important and the oldest film festival in Cuba and the more official of them, is a good way of really knowing if they are accepting your vision or not. So that's the way. As we have this orphanhood, we make our films with the funding we get. So as Yero said, there are still, and we used to have more funds for foreign embassies, like the Norwegian embassy or the Dutch embassy, that gave little money, but that we would to good use for Cuban independent cinema. And then some international funds that sometimes we get, and then crowdfunding, and then our own money that we got by working in other things, and sometimes friends that help you with the camera, with the sound equipment. So there are these ways that we find to make cinema. And then as the film is ours and there is no real state approval seal, we can distribute the films ourselves. So we send it to international film festivals. Sometimes luckily we get a distributor, but it happens not much of the times. And then we really own the film and we can move it. And the government doesn't like it, but they cannot do much about it. And using the internet, as Yero was saying before, that we find these new tools of getting out there without having to get through this state institution to get into the world. I don't know if that answers the question. If you want to say something, Yero, and I don't know if you want to respond about Fernando Perez. I can answer that too afterwards.
So that was another no, it's a big mystery what this approval seal. I think that in Cuba is not so structured. This censorship or control machine as could be in China, but exists. In a very diffuse way, but exists, and a very hard present way. For example, I will share a story about my own films. For example, my last short film, my graduation thesis, there was some intent of censor in the Havana Film Festival. The school where I study has to defend myself in front of the political and the cultural authorities to allow to show my graduation thesis, a documentary film about the Cuban elections, that for the first time it wasn't a Castro to present as the president, candidate president, and it talks about this moment seen from the very ancient couple living in the countryside. So the film, of course, like very critical in a very subtle way. Is very critical. The Golden Herald is the name. Very critical about the history, about a lot of things, but in a very subtle way. And of course, there was like intent of not showing the film in the Havana Film Festival. But at that moment, I was a film student. I have, let's say, the protection of the cinema school that intersect and the film was allowed to take part of the film festival, and at the end also won the principal award of the film. But that experience, it was not the same with my feature film that it was censored last year by the Havana Film Festival. I was by my own. I do the film with my friends that they are spread all over the world. It was a film shooting in Russia days before the beginning of the invasion. The film is called From Moscow is the name. And we get funding, very few funding for this place and this place. And it was like it was made in a very punk energy, I would say. And at the moment I present to the Havana Film Festival, I send the links. I know all the programmers. Cuba is very teeny, so we met and we know everyone. So I sent to the programmers of the film festival, and very easy, very quickly appears that the film got censored by the authorities. So I think there is it's a mix of things that configure, let's say, this censorship or this control machine not so structured as it could be in China. For example, when you talk about some taboo, taboo is not talking in a bad way about Fidel Castro, not talking about the historical leaders. You can make laugh of them, or you can I don't know, to attack in whatever way you can imagine, or talk in other way that you can imagine. There is like a very taboo. That I think that what happened with Jose Luis, that where he used some archive material of Fidel Castro, of course, presenting him in a very critical way, by his own words. That was the reason, that was the reason of the censorship of his film. And for example, in my film, there is a very teeny moment when appears some guy in TikTok talking whatever about how Cuba became the prostitute of the Russian government because in some way support the Putin invasion to Ukraine. So in some way, we are some prostitute of the Russia. And for that very specific line, of course, that very specific line, the film was censored by the Havana Film Festival and, of course, by the cultural institution in Cuba. So Don't talk about some taboo themes. Talk about Fidel Castro and the historical leaders. Don't question the government in a direct way. And I think also it changed. That's the reason it's not so structured. It's like a very mystery. Sometimes work, sometimes no. It changed also about the historical moment. Maybe some films have more freedom. Maybe this is a hypothesis. 10 years ago, when Obama and Cuba was like more starting or trying to look like more open, trying to look more open, and in some way they were teeny freedom, more teeny freedom. But right now, the moment that the context that Cuba right now, of course, any conflict or problematic approach to anything right now is like very punish, immediately receive the punishment from the cultural institution. So it depends also the people that are behind this decision. Most of the time, there are very individual decisions, about censor or not a film. There is not some way a protocol or written or some kind of rules precising or designing what could be shown and what not. Many of the times, interpretation of people in the cultural institution, in the political institution, interpretations of what they think that is good to show or no. So it is very variable, the decisions behind the censorship inside Cuba. And also, I'd say, Jose Luis, we have this teeny space of freedom that is our own actions, our own networks, our own knowledge, information that we gather as filmmaker, and that allows us to share films abroad Cuba in so easy way as send a link or send a link, send a link, and it gets selected by some of these spaces. Right now, Film Festival is the principal path to share our film. Fortunately, ourselves are starting to create other spaces. For example, Jose Luis, Daniela, Jose, Alejandro Alonso. There is a lot of place in other cities that are presenting our works in cultural institutions abroad. They are making our own initiative. I repeat, the INSTAR Film Festival, I think, is a great initiative to make our own spaces of distribution. And I think that the path that we little by little are building to create, to share, to talk about the films we make.
Yeah, for the discussion just now, I just have some thoughts and also questions. I feel independent filmmaking in Cuba as it today is quite a bit similar to indie filmmaking in China in the 1990s when it first started. In terms of, firstly, there isn't a commercial system, as you said, that film industrialization has yet taken off, just like 1990s China. And also about the structure of film censorship. And Yero, you mentioned it's much more structure, film censorship, much more structure in China. However, it wasn't like that in the beginning. That's how indie film could actually emerged. Because the so-called film law was only implemented in 2017 in China. So then it became very strict, very clear. If you don't have a state approval, you are not allowed to do lots of be seen anywhere in the world, basically. So I think, and also in terms of difficulties of getting funding, when some film, a new film came out, I think there are more green areas than later when it became more developed or even in decline. So I kind of the feeling I got is indie filmmaking in China and Cuba at different development stage, where people have already said indie filmmaking in China has died, to some extent. So I guess my question, and nowadays, but the difference between early Chinese indie filmmaking and today's Cuban indie filmmaking for me is now, of course, you have access to digital cameras. Well, early indie Chinese filmmaker didn't have, and also you have that access to internet. You can use internet to circulate your work, and also probably a more globalized world. So I guess my questions for you is for Feng. I don't know if Feng would agree with me that my observation is really because you as a person who went through that early stage of Chinese indie filmmaking, when all those resources were very little, but also probably a little bit more space for you to have develop your film career. And also for them, another thing I noticed at that time, even though those Chinese indie films couldn't be publicly screened in China, but they got lots of interest from international film festivals, curators, so they could be choosing for the showcase outside of China. I'm not sure if that's the case now for Cuban films. Like, do you have lots of opportunities to exhibit your films in overseas film festivals? Did you have the same attention what the Chinese indie films got a couple of decades ago?
就是我自己开始拍纪录片，正好跟中国独立电影刚兴起，正好的时间重合。那阵儿是我第一次看纪录片，其实是93年。93年我在山形，我当时在日本留学上学，跟朋友邀请我去电影节看片，所以我在那儿第一次看的，有中国的，好像是段锦川，还有他们，还有什么吴文光、段锦川，还有郝志强他们的片子开始在日本放，在日本的电影节放。我一点一点说，你翻吧。是吧？说太多了，你不方便啊。
Okay. So Feng Yan will introduce like the golden era, just as Sabrina mentioned, of the Chinese independent films at the beginning of the 21st century. So when she first watched the Chinese independent films, it was when she was studied at Japan and in the Japan Yamagata Film Festival. And at that time, she watched the films made by Duan Jingchuan, Wu Wenguang. Those are like very pioneering Chinese independent filmmakers.
其实最早的那个就是刚开始的时候，我最早其实见到吴文光是92年的时候，有一次他拍的《流浪北京》在东京的一个怎么说呢？一个论坛上放了一些片段，我去给他做翻译。那个时候他自己都没有意识到他在拍纪录片。
When she first watched Wu Guang's film, she was doing a translating job at the film festival, and he was filmed his bombing in Beijing. Yeah.
他说他那阵介绍，他说他是玩录像的。
At that time, he didn't even realize he was a documentary filmmaker. He just said he played with recording videos.
然后等到94年我开始拍的时候，那阵国内也一点一点越来越，一开始国内开始拍纪录片的那些人都是拍独立电影的人，尤其我说是纪录片领域，还不是那么大的范围，不包括剧情。然后纪录片领域基本都是他们在体制里有某份工作能蹭电视台的机器的人。
So, when I first started to make films in 1994, there are a lot of people filming independent films, and at that time, independent films are all documentaries. And those people who all have jobs inside the system, in that case, they can get the machine to film their own videos.
所以我觉得中国的独立纪录片的发展，其实跟那个小型机器 DV 的普及是分不开的。
So I think the development of the Chinese independent films is inseparable from the usage of small machines.
等到我2003年回国，2002年回国的时候，2003年正式回来的时候，那时候就是国内的影展已经开始有独立影展了。比如说第一届的03年的云之南影展，我也参加了。
When I returned back to China, there began to emerge more and more independent film festivals. For instance, the first edition of the Yunnan Multicultural Film Festival.
那是中国最早的那个独立影展之一。
Sorry for the fire alarm. That was the first independent film festivals in China. One of.
在厅可以盛500个观众，基本都满了。
It was screened in the library of the school, and the library actually can accommodate 500 people, and it was all full.
然后后来在云南影展之外，还有南京影展也起来，还有北京独立影展，北京纪录片交流周吧，反正它的名字一点点变。然后就是有除了这3大影展之后，各地还有很多，比如说杭州青年电影节呀，什么重庆独立影展，会有很多地方的影展出现。
Apart from the Yunnan Independent Film Festival, there emerged a lot of different independent festivals in different cities in China, like in Nanjing, in Beijing, in Hangzhou, and in Chongqing.
所以就是说，那还有很多地方的放映组织，所以大约10年左右吧，中国的独立影展非常的那个怎么说呢？各地都有，非常兴盛。
So at around the year of 2010, there were a lot of independent film festivals in China.
其实他度过了一个非常就是我觉得我自己更多的参与的，比如说有那个北京独立北京纪录片交流周，北京就等于北京的独立影展吧。
I participated more in the independent film festivals in Beijing.
比如说就是我除了就是每次影展的时候，所有的那个就是导演能来的都会来。会有很多年轻人，就是大家特别热烈的讨论。比如说还有一次，就是有一次在云南的影展上，我们大家就是各抒己见，争吵的就是非常厉害吧。还有人像跪在那个桌子上给人道歉这种，就是那阵儿的。我觉得我所说的，我的意思是说，当时在国内就是大家对创作的激情是非常高涨的，而且条件相对宽松。虽然它是民间的举办的，但是中间也遇到了很多压力，但是在那个期间，基本还都能做成这件事儿，还能有你拍出来的片子会有地方放。虽然它不能进电影院，不能有更多的那个地方，但是呢，有独立影展存在的话，就是它会鼓励很多年轻人再去创作。
So at that time, a lot of filmmakers, especially young filmmakers, they would attend those independent film festivals. And there was even a time people had really harsh debates about how to make films. So at that time, although those are like grassroots film festivals, and there's still a lot of pressure from it, but people still have that passion to film and to share their films.
而且在这些影展上，世界各地的那个大影展的那些选片人都会来，他们会看中国的片子。在中国的那阵，中国是一个很大的一个热门，很多世界上电影节的人都到中国来看片子，来选片子。
So at that time, a lot of curators from other international film festivals will participate in the Chinese independent film festivals and to select films. So at that time, Chinese independent films were really popular among the world.
然后就随着独立影展被一点点关停吧，大约10年，有10年的时间吧。10年之后，独立影展就逐渐被关停了。关停了之后，就是创作的人一下子大家就散了，这个队伍看不见人了，就没有当时那么多人。那一阵儿就好多年轻人都拿着机器，就是每年的影展都会有很多年轻人来投他们的电影，尤其是纪录片啊，特别多。
So during these 10 years, after all the independent film festivals were shut down, there are fewer and fewer young filmmakers had that passion to make films. So there's basically now no people making the independent films.
所以就是现在就是好像就是这个队伍散了，原来也不是说有一个军队有一个队伍，但是有影展，它就会聚很多人过来。现在就是没有，大家没有地方聚了，互相之间有很多人都已经移民海外了，或者是有很多散兵游勇还在接着拍片，但是已经形不成气候了。
So there was actually a community for all the independent filmmakers, but with all the independent film festivals being shut down, there is a sense that the home is lost. So most of the independent filmmakers, they just moved overseas, and there's just people made their own films, but there's no more a community and a home for them.
尤其最近这几年，电影法规定的越来越严格，包括短片都没有龙标都不能参加国际影展，所以就越来越严苛吧。
And especially during these years with the film law to get the Dragon Seal, if you do not get the Dragon Seal, you cannot even submit your short films to the film festivals overseas. So it becomes more and more strict.
Perhaps Tuo would like to add something about the contemporary situation as well, from how you're experiencing it on the inside.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So from my personal experience, I barely show my works in film festival context very much. So, but yeah, I know that. Yeah, just like Madam Feng said, yeah, I heard that there's like a strong punishment for like a independent film makers, if they, sort of break the rule, if you don't have that label from the government, you're going to be banned for 5 years from making films in China. And right now, so it probably just like several months ago, and this new rule just already came to the short films. And yeah, so I don't know if I'm in a very perfect position to share my experience about the independent film context. So, but from my own field in visual arts, so I think it's a little bit different because most of the time we show our works as a form of video installation. So sometimes it's like multiple channels video installation, and it's very much dealing with the space, with the like an exhibition space. So it's like in a museum or in a gallery or in any kinds of institution, and but yeah, we also have a quite strict censorship process with it. For instance, like we have to deal with so many parts of the government. Some parts is like a commission for discipline inspection, and we have a national security. Then we have a culture and a tourist department, and we have like a central propaganda department. So we have like all kinds of different people, and they're all in different positions. For instance, like if I want to have an exhibition of my own, I have to. Me and also the institution, they have to submit everything to the government, to the tourist and the culture department, like 2 months in advance, and they're gonna check everything very carefully, and then they're gonna give you give a feedback to you. So it says, from which minute to which minute, although it's not a film, it's not in a theater, it's in a museum. So they're going to tell you, which part of the film, which part of the video work, you have to delete them. And then, so they're going to, so one before, like two days before the exhibition opens, there will be someone from the government, they will come down to check if you already changed everything. So I also have that in my work, the second interrogation. They have the cell phone. They have a very special, a very specific app for them. The app is for the officers, they want to see, they go to see different exhibitions, and they record them and they write reviews. So it's like support, but it's like reviews, and they submit the reviews. And so yeah, but so like from my experience, like sometimes we and the people working in the government in the institution, we think, oh, okay, probably we can argue a little bit with the people working in the government, because if we delete this part of the work, it doesn't make any sense. But normally we're not going to do that, because they have the right to shut you down like right away. You cannot even open this exhibition, no matter how much you have prepared. So this is like a one thing. And another thing is, my most recent experience is, but this very normal in my life, this August, I had 2 public lecture in Beijing. And so there's someone from national security. So, but he pretend he's a fan of yours, and he's sitting among the audience, and also he asks questions. And but the thing is, he doesn't know. I know he is like special agent in disguise, But we already know that, and that's also a very strange feeling, because when he asks questions, he asks very professional questions, because he's been in our world like 24/7 for many years, and he can also quote you. He quote the interview you had like several years ago. He can remember what you said before. So that is very terrifying. Yeah, this is a big part of our life as an artist here. And also there's another big thing we have to deal with is the audience. The audience is a big part. So yeah. So in 2021, there's a team from the Central Propaganda Department came down to, ask me a lot of questions for a whole afternoon. And the institution in Beijing, they're like very surprised about this, because barely there will be no people from the Central Propaganda Department to came down to interrogate. And so they wonder, it's with a great possibility is, my exhibition got reported by the audience. So, that is a quite a regular, normal mindset, for Chinese audience. They have like a very strong nationalist. If you're criticizing or you don't praising, or they feel like, your work is not that positive, it's negative, you'll be in trouble, and they're gonna make a phone call and you'll be in trouble. And so yeah, we have to deal with like different parts of the society. And I for the commercial parts, for how to found the making, the production, I think it's also quite different from the film industry, because we don't have this distribution thing in the visual art world, and we don't sell tickets, and so we can never like make money from a distribution or tickets. So basically, the video works in our world, it has a concept. It's quite similar with the prints. So basically we sell editions. So normally it's like we have 5 editions plus 2 AP. So it means like you can sell like 7 times of your works to different, either it could be like the private collectors, or it's like museums. So with the collections, so basically, yeah, that's the artist's way of how to survive, and how they can sponsor themselves to continue making. Yeah, but it's not so easy, because this kind of a collection in China is quite small. It's very small, because mostly, people like to buy paintings, but for this kind of a media, it's very intangible. So, we don't have that many collectors who like to, or institutions in China, they like to buy, they like to collect the videos. So sort of we have to go out, and also we can. So for me, my personal case is most of my works for the past several years. Even though it looks like it's not that political sensitive, but if you dig a little bit more, it's dealing with some particular parts of history in China. So it's something already crossing the red line, and you cannot show them in China. So for my own protection, I think I'd better not to show them in China publicly. So as for me, just I have to try to find another way. In China, we I don't know if it's similar with the indie film in China. We have like an underground exhibition space or screening space. It's invitation only, and we don't go public at all. We just get around a very small group of people, and that we trust it. So we try to use this kind of form to construct a community that we can have like a sheer trust and confidence to share, to communicate with some dangerous stuff. So yeah, we have been doing that a lot. We have like a underground screenings and exhibitions and conversations. And other than that, I think we still, as an visual artist, we still have the freedom to make things, because while we're making, basically, it's quite a small production, and the government, they don't know, and then they cannot catch you, and then they cannot stop you. You can just make things freely, but showing it is a different story. Yeah. So, and other than that, we can also try to show them outside of China, but it's getting dangerous right now because there's a lot of Chinese people outside China, and they can also report you. So it's getting dangerous. Yeah. So you have to be careful. For me, I never accept a mass medium, like a New York Times, that kind of medium. I cannot do interview with them, because that kind of medium is something the government, they pay 100% attention on every day. So I don't do that. Yeah.
I was just thinking about what Sabrina mentioned earlier, and listening to you all speak about this idea about whether Cuban and Chinese independent cinema are at different stages of development. And I think for me, maybe it's not the right way to understand the differences between them in terms of a linear development, because the contexts are so different. And I was trying to think about what I know about the Cuban context, and why does the film industry function in a certain way in Cuba? Why does censorship function in a certain way in Cuba? And similarly, why does it work how it works in China? I think, I'd like to hear from everybody on this, but just from what I've been thinking, there's two factors that I think are important in the Cuban context. And one is the economy, the poor state of the economy, which really functions to facilitate censorship indirectly, in the sense that, there are fewer and fewer cinemas on the island in Cuba. So I was thinking, does the state really have to worry about, there are just few spaces, right? So to do also with the control of space and the use of space. To what extent does independent cinema represent a threat when there are very few opportunities to see independent cinema within Cuba? And part of that is to do with the not very many cinemas, and also the state control of what's shown in the cinemas. But then, of course, you also have this parallel gray market of the paquete, which is a kind of digital compilation of materials that circulates more freely within Cuba. But there's so much international content there, then Cuban media has to sort of fight for its place within the paquete and for people's attention. So I think sometimes the economy and the lack of resources facilitates censorship and makes it more difficult for independent cinema to kind of circulate. And then the other factor I was thinking about was a sort of political cultural factor in terms of how the state relates to culture more broadly. You know, there's the most famous kind of cultural policy articulated by Fidel Castro was within the revolution, everything, against the revolution, nothing. So I think inaugurated this kind of relationship whereby control is exerted by incorporation in a way. So when you try to and if we think about the origins of Cuban independent cinema in the 90s, also with digital technology, I think a really important factor. So there's a kind of maybe parallel development in that sense. But it was also a time when there was a policy of trying to revive the revolution in some way by trying to integrate young people back into the revolution, sort of revolutionary values, trying to bring new directors in, or offered some kind of small space for participation for new directors within the State Film Institute. And the Muestra Joven, which was created in 2000, I think it was 2000, 2001, is an example of that space which was created that is kind of within independent, but not fully independent, and is a kind of way of maybe trying to mitigate risks of the critical voices that might emerge. It seems to me like a very distinctive approach of the Cuban state. That is maybe one of the reasons why, with two reasons why things have developed differently. Like I don't think that beyond the Muestra Joven there have really been independent film festivals that have emerged. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I'd like to hear what other people think about why do you think the system is developed as it did and independent cinema developed as it did within your context.
Well, it's very interesting what you're saying, because I think we all have a lot of warmth and appreciation for the Muestra Joven, but it started as some sort of mechanism control in a very indirect way, because there was a necessity to have a festival like this, because there was a new movement of filmmakers emerging in the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s that were trying to make a new kind of Cuban cinema, that were using these new tools like the digital cameras and digital sound equipment that got into Cuba. And I think there was this culture of, okay, let's get this space for them, and they can be content with only having 1 week a year to have their film screen. And maybe if they have this, they won't ask for a more traditional type of distribution to access the cinema more regularly and have like the premieres, like the commercial premieres as in other countries. Or I think there was this idea of creating a niche. Okay, they have this niche where they can get together and show their films 1 week a year, and maybe they will be happy with this. And I think, and it started also with more bureaucratic control. But what happened with the event is that the filmmakers, there were previous generations. It's not our generation that started in this movement, this Muestra Joven. But talking to them, you know that they little by little were taking the control of the event. So of course the event was always a limbo state, a limbo place, because it was between the in-betweenness between the institution and the desire of the independent and young filmmakers to screen their films and to make the event. But in those last years that were the more problematic, I think, it was when there were no official directors, like bureaucratic official directors of the Muestra Joven, and because the filmmakers took control of the event. So they created this idea of there is like organizing members, and they were all young filmmakers, and they were the ones deciding how the event should be, which films were going to be screened. And they got into, because I was part of that group of people too in the last years, we got into discussions, debates, even fights with these bureaucrats defending particular films and defending their right to be shown in the event. So I think this experiment of having this niche, this mechanism control once a year, got out of control for them. So it got more and more difficult to manage because we wanted always more. And every year we had new ideas, so we want to make an homage to a difficult figure from the past, or we wanted to show more difficult films because those were the films that were being produced. We were not trying to be conflictive. They were the ones conflicted because of what we were making, what we were desiring at that time. So I think that was a period, at least for me personally, for some friends of my generation and other generations, that we really thought of, maybe, I don't know if naively, but we really thought that we could change things by making this kind of gestures of trying to make the event as more similar to what we are, to what we wanted the country to be. And we wanted to create these democratic horizontal structures even in the making of the event. And we really tried to take a stand against the institution and defend our rights. And of course, that got more difficult to manage, and they decided at the end that it was better to have no event than to deal with us every year. And we really became a headache as a generation. We did this manifesto, like our domain, trying to also state like what we felt the independent film movement was and wanted. So I think that, of course, we influence, we as a community, we influence and prompted some changes, some answers that were positive at the time from them. But at the end, the things that were not able to be discussed in Cuba, they are not going to let it do it every year, an event with their money also. That is also our money because it's public funding. We are paid like the worst salaries. Yeah, so that's also our right to claim that project. No, in a normal state, it won't be a problem. But in the case of Cuba, where everything gets into this binary oppositions between state and independent, and that's something that benefits them, because trying to not see the gray areas, the in-betweenness, when you are getting very problematic, you get into the independent side of the discussion, and then it's easier for them to defamate you, to put you at risk, to put you out of work, to censor you, so to demonize you. So yeah, it's something like that what happened. Yeah, maybe it was also a consequence of being this in-between state, but it's probably the only way that in Cuba you can get to do things at this scale. Because if not, you should do what we did afterwards, and what we did even then, and what other filmmakers like Miguel Coyula does, that you should screen your film in your house every Sunday and invite every time 4 or 5 people that are going to watch it. And during the years, you get an audience, like a bigger audience. But at that time, we wanted the cinemas, and we got them, but we lost them because, well, what happened. But I think that also taught us that we need to create our own events, our own spaces that we can control entirely, although precarious. But that's the point that, as Yero was saying, we are trying to do right now, even in the exile, in the diaspora. We're trying to open new spaces all the time to show these films and to debate and to encounter with our fellow filmmakers, and also filmmakers from other countries that go through similar experiences as we are doing here today.
I found like a very interesting shared common points between the independent cinema in China and Cuba. I think that in some way, right now the situation for independent filmmakers in China has been great to listen your experience. In some way, we have like a very similar past, and I think that right now the situation in China, the control over, there is rules, there are written rules, and there is a protocol to control the independent voices. If you say something that is not allowed, you receive a punishment, and that is a law that is written. That is the difference in some way with Cuba. And I think that in some way right now China is in relation to the independent voices, independent creation, in some way is some kind of a future, or dystopic future that could be Cuba. and that is just beginning to happen in Cuba. For example, since I don't know 4 years ago, in Cuba, start to make laws, decretos, how to say decreto in English?
Decrees, I think.
Decrease that control in law and design the punishment and what you can do and what you can't do and the punishment that you receive for that. That in some cases it also maybe could include a prison. It happened. It's starting to happen right now. So in some way, let's see how we have the Independent Festival inside the country was the window to make community, to share our works, to build generation, and how it dies in China and also in Cuba. I think there is also a difference that we are a youth, we are, let's say, very young generation. We don't have, let's say, kids. We don't have places that with a compromise with family. I don't know. We're like very in our 20s or 30s, and for us, the solution was to get out of the country, to go abroad to Cuba and trying to make and keep making films outside Cuba, even filming Cuba outside Cuba. But I guess maybe for a Chinese independent filmmaker, maybe I'm wrong. I'm just I'm asking, no, what happens when you don't have any funding opportunity, any access opportunity, any exhibition opportunity in your own country? What do you do? How do you keep doing and making films? And also that is a question for you that I'm very curious. How do you resolve this situation? Because sadly, very sadly, our answer as generation has been getting out the country because it's getting as there is laws, there is starting to appear laws, and the control is getting worse every year. So we found that solution. If we can't create here, if we can be free creators here, we go out, we go abroad. But what happened with independent Chinese voices when there is so strict control, so solid control, that there is, for example, lack in Cuba, fortunately, but that is disappear more and more and more right now in the present.
Okay, I guess I will let To and Yan you to answer this question. But I do notice two Cuban filmmakers here, both in diaspora, while two Chinese filmmakers here are still inside China, working, very actively still creating. So that's really already show us the situation in different contexts. Can some difference, but yeah, I would let To and Yan to answer Yero's question about how they are still in China and making film or video arts.
我觉得对拍纪录片的人来说，去国外是一条路。事实上，有很多年轻人已经有过一些作品的年轻人，已经出去了，但是我觉得对拍纪录片的人来说，离开了中国，他的路就会变窄。所谓的路就会变窄，就是他要拍的现实，因为我们拍纪录片，它脱离不开你这个一个本土的现实。我觉得这是一个最大的困境。新月，你先帮我翻这个。
Okay, I'll translate. So actually now a lot of young Chinese filmmakers, they've already went outside China, but his road will be narrowed down because the reality that he left out China, he cannot shoot the Chinese realities.
我前2天看王拓老师的片的时候，我还觉得我说好高明，我说他们肯定看不懂，很多没想到观众也有举报的。 我还想这是一个很好的方向，我说这种表达太高级，他们肯定看不懂。我当时是这样想的，我还很兴奋。
So when I was watching Wang Tuo's films, I was like, oh, this is so clever. The audience will not get the meaning, but the audience still reported the film.
我是说审查的那些人看不懂哈，原来审查的人他们也提高了门槛了，现在等于是，
I mean, the people who censored the film, but now they become smarter and they can understand the meaning.
但是我觉得是这样，因为我这些年也有接触一些很多年轻人，他们对纪录片感兴趣，但是因为很多限制，很艰难嘛。我也接触过一些教学的工作，比如说一些工作坊。我觉得方法是有的，在国内坚持创作的方法是有的。
I've actually participated in several workshops and teaching in China, so I got the conversation to contact with some of the young filmmakers, and I believe that there is still a way to create a film in China.
我觉得是这样，我觉得是我一直认为就是在力所能及的范围内做事。就是在现在不管是资金啊，还是整体的制作情况都受限的情况下，不要一下子想着我要搞多高的制作，我要有哪样的班底才能做，我要有哪样的资金才能做。就是你哪怕拿一个小机器，我觉得你先把自己这颗怎么说呢？如果这些年轻人能把他想要表达的这个火种保留下来，我觉得就非常重要。在现在。
I think for the young people, they just need to do what they can do at the moment, even with very small machines. But the most important thing is to keep their passion to create.
因为就是因为现在国内独立影展都关停了，但是有一些人是有一些，比如说Forst 呀，或者是Cinex 这样的机构，它会有一些每年会有一些选题，它这些选题当然也有一些很好的选题，但是还毕竟是怎么说呢？通常他们有很多也是比如说申请龙标啊，或者是怎么说呢？就比较不那么，就是他们会有规避的机制吧，能拿到那样的放的人特别少。
So there are still several independent film festivals like First and the founder like Cinex. So they will have several topics that can still escape from the censorship and get some funding, but those topics are very rare to see.
所以他同时但是他也要求这个创作者要有一定的经验，或有一定的能力，或者有一定的 career， 他才能拿到。所以他其实就是更多的，他不像很多就是10年以前那有很多独立影展的时候，那些更多的人涌现出来，不断的有很多人涌现出来，因为那些年轻人他拿了一个不是特别成熟的作品，他参加了影展之后，他受到了很多的启发，他自己的创作劲头也上来了。其实人有的时候做电影的时候，不见得考虑的更多的是回报，尤其是第一部和第二部的时候。所以这样的所以就我觉得，其实现在最大的困境是因为年轻人没有地方去给别人看自己的东西了，所以他们再加上没有地方给别人看，没有这些独立影展的存在，再加上生活很艰难，所以他就很难坚持下去。如果就是虽然生活很艰难，但是还有独立影展可以放自己的片子，作为一个导演，他还是有某种；作为一个作者，还是能获得某种感觉，它是不一样的这两种。
Yeah, so the situation now is not like 10 years ago that you can get feedback from the film festivals. I think the most significant problem now is that there is no place to show the films. So, and also the life is hard for some of the young filmmakers. But even if there is a place to show their films, they will still have that passion to create the films.
所以很多好导演其实是从很小的东西起步的，但是他有这个机会，现在没有这些机会就越来越艰难吧。所以但是我觉得其实就是一个选择吧，能出国有很多人有能力的人走了，但是出去之后有一个最大的困难是你如何生活呢？然后你如何拍跟你 有连接的这块土地的故事呢，这是一个很大的困境。这个我都不知道如何解决这些人。我认识的朋友，他们有出去送外卖呀，就是他们比如在家里做外卖给中国留学生啊那样的，或者是开 Uber 啊什么的。因为我都觉得，就是如果要是脱离了这种，你在国内不管怎么说，还觉得自己是个知识分子的那种，我还是个艺术家那样的。到了国外之后，就是在这种生活更多的你的阶层落了，就是一下子就差了很多的情况下，如何在坚持你那种艺术的那怎么说呢？你做艺术创作的那种冲动，我觉得这个特别难平衡，因为我回来了就没再出去，所以我就很难想象那些人，就是他那些方面他会如何做啊？当然也有一些人做的不错的。
So a lot of good filmmakers, they start from very small things. And another thing for the filmmakers who go outside is that how do they earn a living? I know there are filmmakers who go outside to earn a living by be a delivery man or be a Uber driver. But before, when they were in China, they were those of like the artist class. But how do they face the fall of their class? And how do they film? How do they connect with their own culture? So I think that's the most important thing. When they cannot make a living, they will lose the passion and interest to make films. Although there are still people who balance the situation well, but that would be a problem for, in my opinion.
当然还有一个语言问题，可能古巴没有语言问题吧，这也是一个很大的。
And another thing is about language. I suppose Cuban filmmakers does not have the language problem, but that would be a problem for Chinese filmmakers.
我就说这些吧。
Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
Can want to add something because you are also there.
Okay. Yeah. So I totally agree with Madam Feng's words, and actually I just remember there's a saying in the indie film industry in China. So it says something like this. It says, as long as you just grab a camera to shoot one ordinary person's normal life in China, and you keep shooting it for like several years, and you already have a censored film. So in one hand, I think this is something about, here in China, the censored film is not just about political, it's about real life, it's about the real dilemmas and the real traumatic life in China. And then the other way, if we could explain this saying, it may be something like, the complicity in China, it provides you a lot to discover, and it's endless. So for me, I think, because for my personal experiences, I used to live in America for 5 years. So back then, when I was there in New York, although I wanted to talk about something about my own experience in China and my history and my understanding about the complicity or the dilemma in China, but because there's a distance between us, so it's very difficult. I have to talk about something universal, and so basically that's one of the reasons that I decided to move back to China. I think for me, I think as long as there's no one knocking like at my door, I'll keep staying here, making stuff, because I think making art is one thing. Another thing is you really can try to feel the problem here, and you can also try to organize and unite with other people, and try to, just like I said, try to shape a community here, and to to plant some seeds for the future. You know, I'm not that optimistic right now, you know, about, you know, we can change the situation here in China right now. We can, I think maybe, you know, but we have to keep some spirit, you know. So you know, several years ago when I did my research about the Cultural Revolution, you know, I found out something quite interesting. Before that, you know, my understanding about the art in Cultural Revolution is just about propaganda art. It's just about mainstream. So after my research, I found out that, you know, actually during the Cultural Revolution, we have a lot of underground arts. You know, they're criticizing or they're like reflecting the reality, and also a lot of most of the artist or the writer during Cultural Revolution, they still have this kind of expression. They also survived. They also kept their lives, and they just managed to find a way. You know, we have this kind of a handwritten, like a transcript novel. You know, like if this writer had a novel, he will just handwritten. It's like a transcript the novel to another person, and you have one night to copy this book by hand, and then you give it to another man. And so this is like a totally underground, like a reading chain. So they have its own way to survive. So I always feel that, you know, if we don't have this kind of a form, this kind of a spirit during the Cultural Revolution, actually after the Cultural Revolution, we're not going to have the new Enlightenment movements in China. We're not going to have the scar literature. You know, we're not going to have the 1989. So this is something we have to keep. You know, so basically, I think what we're trying to do here in China right now is something similar. You know, we have to keep something underground in the soil. It's in the earth, and it's, although it's invisible, it's hidden, but we keep something for the future.
I was struck by what you said there, Tor, about this saying amongst Chinese filmmakers of, if you just keep filming someone's life, eventually you're going to get a censored film, just because the reality is like that. And it just made me think, and this is a question for everyone, about I guess the subjects, the people, and also the subject matter, the themes and the aesthetics that you associate with independent cinema in each context. I know that documentary film has been really important in both Cuba and China, but also fiction film. But I was wondering if you could comment maybe on those decisions and maybe how they relate to what you perceive to be a kind of cinematic canon or tradition within Cuba and within China.
No, I think, as I said at the beginning of the during my presentation, I always at first time think myself as just as a filmmaker, just as a guy who makes films, but in a very specific situation. I'm Cuban. I came from the country. What is Cuba? As I say, I grew up as part of orphan generation, so I don't have in some way the funding, the distribution option, the access. Another part of the world has for themselves. So let's say that situation, the funding and the access, maybe it has an effect, on the movies and the narrative or the aesthetic of the film that I made. But always at the first, I don't think in independent aesthetic or independent narrative. I always think what I want to do and what I need to share and to tell in this film right now. That is the most important thing for me. And of course, when you have like a very short resources, when you have to deal with a lack of access to some subject or some territories or some people, you figure out other ways to shoot, to have the access, or to, with very little resources, try to make a film. Of course, that it has, let's say, an effect on the narrative, on the aesthetic of the film. I think that how it works, at least in my case, repeat, I never think I want to make independent narrative. No, I want to say and to shoot whatever I want and whatever I need right now. And the lack of all these, let's say, resources, access, fund distribution, made me in some way to find some solution or some aesthetics, but trying to resolve and to make the film. So I could make like a very, if at some point of my life I want to make a classical film, I don't know, a musical film, I would try to make a musical film. You know, the way where I try to want and to the way it could possible for me to make a musical film. So that for me, in my case, how it works and how the principles I practice, let's say principles or whatever, as a filmmaker, where of course the context where I grew up and I became a director, a filmmaker, has an effect in the movies that I've made.
In my case, I don't feel like I made documentaries, but I don't feel like I am a documentary filmmaker. I always been more drawn to fiction, and it's what I try to develop the most. But I think in both cases, because it's also hybrid right now, there is no sense in separating both worlds because it's much more complex than that. But I think, of course, when I grew up watching Cuban cinema, like a more traditional or canonized state-sponsored Cuban cinema, of course I liked some films and some authors, but I didn't find myself really there. So I didn't start making films because I love those films. I loved other films from many countries in the world. So I could be really felt myself more influenced by a film, sometimes coming from Asia or from Europe or from Latin America than from the Cuban films, or at least what I thought was what was the Cuban cinema. But I later found out that Cuban cinema was richer than that. And there were other filmmakers that were sometimes in the margins of the institutions or working alternatively or on the diaspora that were making films that I felt were closer to me, to the vision I have of the country and to my experience. And they were trying to find new paths regarding the language, the grammar of cinema also, and that were more experimental or were taking more risks or were trying to construct an image of the country that was outside of that control image that the state has always tried to use in the propaganda films, or they always want to control the imaginary, the images that come from the country, because that's also a way to maintain a certain idea of what the country is. And of course, all the images that doesn't fit in this template, they can be censored, they can be punishable. In documentary filmmaking and in fiction filmmaking, in the case of what I thought out the most is how to try to make fiction films that feel different for me or closer to what I like in fiction, to the freedom of imagination that fiction can have. And I felt that in the traditional Cuban fiction films, there was always this big question of history in capital letters, that there was always this necessity of talking about the revolution, of talking about the history of the great men, the great leaders, and there was not that much space for the intimate stories, for smaller characters, for existential conflicts, or for experimentation with form and genre. And I like a lot genre cinema and how you can mix genres and create like also your personal expression out of that. So, and that was something that particularly in Cuba was not very well seen because it was associated with commercial cinema. And at the time that was a problem. So like trying to make a science fiction film or a fantasy film or a horror film or a musical, as Yero said, it was if it was not on the within the boundaries of well, are you talking about the revolution? Are you talking about social transformation? Are you talking about the new man and all this utopian thinking? If not, if you are talking about uncertainty, if you're talking about doubts, if you are taking certain new ways of creating images about your country, then it's dangerous. And I always thought about how we can create new images for that country we have in our minds and in our experiences, and how you can try new ways of representing this current reality and showing new ways of seeing it that is not in this canonized cinema. And I think, of course, our generation has been doing that, but we have predecessors. I remember I was very inspired and stimulated when I found out that there were fiction films like the ones from Jorge Molina or Miguel Coyula, or the way Issei films like the ones that Susana Barriga made in the beginning of the 2000s, or there were like filmmakers like Nicolas Guillen Landrian that were taking this propaganda language and turning that into something else and turning it against the government that created the propaganda in the first place. So then you found that there is a tradition, like a certain kind of genealogy of filmmakers that through all these periods have been trying to do something different and trying to present a different country, and I think a more real country, because it's not a country determined by propaganda or ideology in that strict sense. And yeah, I think that we're trying to do that, and I think we have we don't feel that burden today that maybe other generations felt, because we have other options and other possibilities. But because I think as a way of thinking and about ourselves and our experience, we don't feel that we need to answer to certain expectations of ourselves. As Yero said, we try to do whatever we feel we need to do, and out of that necessity and out of that desire, those are our films. And we do not try to negotiate with the canon or with the tradition in that sense. No, we don't try to fit in. We try to open new ways, I think.
Do our Chinese colleagues want to add something about how they feel about what is the aesthetics, thematics of independent film in China and its relationship to, I guess, the Chinese film canon or state sort of filmmaking?
我觉得这就是那个，对我来说，中国的电影传统对我没有什么影响。我快速的说啊。
Oh, okay. I will put it briefly. I will put it briefly. I don't think the Chinese film tradition has any impact on me.
因为我不是学电影出身的，因为我不是学电影出身的，我所有的电影教育，我所有的纪录片教育，都是我在电影节看电影得来的。比如说我在我拍片之前，我已经去过2次山形影展，从头至尾的一天10几个小时看片那样的。
Because my major was not in film studies before, all the film education I received was from the film festivals. For example, I've attended the Yamagata Film Festival twice, just sat there and watched the films for the whole day for several hours.
所以那个后来我又翻了一个电影导演的书，然后迷上了纪录片，然后直接就开始买机器拍了。然后就是在拍的过程中，一点一点的不停的看片，然后不停的那个，就是看别人的片子是这样学习的，跟中国的电影没有什么关系。我个人觉得，跟电影没有关系。
And then I translated one filmmaker's book, and then I just got more interested at filmmaking. So I just went straight to buy a camera and began making my own films. And then I just watched films and shoot my own films. In this process, I learned how to make films. So personally speaking, I don't think the Chinese cinema had any impact on my filmmaking experience.
要是剧情片可能不一样，剧情片可能需要一些最基础的东西，但是纪录片它好在有这个小机器，你只要用自动用全自动就可以拍。我一开始就是这样拍的，直到后期才一点点学习。
For feature films, it might be different, but for documentaries, you just need that small machine and you just film. So that's the way how I learned to make documentaries.
I personally, I don't have a, I don't think I have any influence from a Chinese film tradition as well. Yeah, because I, I, I don't watch that many films, Chinese film or Western film, but since I was a kid, I watched a lot of Hollywood film. That's so true. Yeah, so for me, I think that's a big part of it is the contemporary art is when I get to China, it's 100% Western thing, and so later on, people start to reflect and to rethink, how we can transform the contemporary art into something more dealing with the Chinese subject matter, and of course, we believe that this is something about the medium itself, on its ontology, but also at the same time, I think a medium is just a tool, and that's something we could utilize to talk about something we really care about, and yeah, but I think there's something more and more we're paying attention right now is we need to think about the power structure in different mediums like a contemporary art or film. When you have this tool, when you have the right or this powerful tool to talk, and how you're going to use it, and how you're going to utilize it, but instead of playing a complicit with the system you want to fight against. And that's quite normal here in China as well, because even in the so-called underground art world or the contemporary art, we all know that. So the contemporary art world is also, it's getting, part of it is it's more and more get involved with the bigger system. So I think the artists or the filmmakers, even the independent filmmakers, sometimes they need to think about, if your ways of impression got utilized. For instance, like nowadays in China, there's a one form of art, contemporary art, is being utilized as a new form of propaganda. That is technology art. Talking about technology, and it's very about the media of. It's about a new medium. It's and the subject matter is also dealing with the new technology and advanced technology here. So basically, the subcontext about this type of work is very apolitical, and it's basically it's like showing the muscle of the nation. So this kind of art is just like I said, it's an instance of, although it has a form of contemporary art or a form of avant-garde medium, but actually it's placed as a complicit with the government. And also sometimes, I know this is not very much here in China, but in some countries, other countries, they have a censorship system. Sometimes they even want to show, the very dangerous kind of a work outside of their own country, because this is a way for them to that outside world to know that, okay, they have the freedom of speech, but actually this is a way of a gesture. Yeah, so I think this kind of a situation also we need to pay a little bit attention on. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. I think compared to 30 years ago, when the generation Feng and Chinese indie filmmakers started making films, they had a very limited choices. Most of them therefore choose documentary as a way to express themselves. There are some fictional films, but not many, just purely because of the, how much budget. And you have very little budget to make films, and documentary become the first choice. And so it's really, I'm really glad to see nowadays the situation has changed for the young filmmakers here from both China and Cuba. I think you now make films, different type of films, different genres, and different, lots of different way, show your film in cinema, in gallery. So I just thought that's probably something quite positive, and again, helped by the technology, by internet, social media, all those things, or more for education, film education. I mean, I'm not saying those very systematic, that kind of institutional related film education, but film education from all sources. So that's something, one of my observation, which I think I'm quite encouraged. Yeah, I don't know if Dunia want to say more, but but my idea is probably all of us to share some reflection of the discussion today. If there's anything else you want to add to this discussion, yeah, because before we end it, thank you.
No, I think it has been very very informative, very powerful, and I think it's for me at least it's great to see myself and my generation and the films we made in the mirror of Chinese cinema, because I think you have accumulated a great share of experience, and even before us, before we got to make these kind of films, these independent films, you were making them, and I think we have a lot to learn from that, and a lot of things to in common also. And for me, at least, thinking about my films and in the last years, it has been great to discover a lot of Chinese independent films, and also making this retrospective in the festival. And yeah, I think one way or the other, they are really influencing what I think, what kind of cinema I want to keep making. And also, it's good to find out all these strategies, all this way of finding spaces among censorship and amongst all the political and economical difficulties we have discussed. So yeah, it has been great. Just wanted to comment that it has been great to listen to all of you and to share all of our experiences trying to make films in this complicated context. So thank you.
Yes, I'm very also appreciate this conversation. I think that there was like a very essential word said during this conversation. There was the idea of community. Cinema is like to make cinema is very hard. It has a lot of needs, economic needs, logistic needs, political, a lot of needs. So there is a sense of community at the moment to make any film. So I think when we are, let's say, in some way independent voices, or we made the films that we like, the films we need to do at whatever cost, against any form of control or any walls. Of course, the idea of community is very important. It's a very sad situation when you look to your side and there is no one to talk, there is no one to unite forces. And I think that this kind of initiative of the dialogue, of conversation, is very important because community, I think, is what in some way give us strength to keep making film. So thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. All this we have been talking during this morning. For me, this morning here in Brazil, sorry. And China is night.
我特别同意那个刚才这个导演说的，有一个组织很重要啊。其实更宽泛点的说，就是我们有一个圈子，是吧？我们可以互相鼓励，就像以前中国的那个独立电影节一样，有电影节大家聚在一起，更多的时间除了看电影之外就是喝酒聊天儿。我觉得这个非常重要。今天我知道你们古巴也有很多的问题，虽然你们的审查更隐性化，不是表面上像我们这样龙标那么严格，但其实也有。我觉着好像突然觉得不那么艰难了。我觉着大家都有各种各样的问题。谢谢。
So I absolutely agree with what the Cuban filmmakers mentioned. It's really important to have a community that we can encourage and back each others up. Like before, when we still have those independent film festivals, another important thing is just to get together, drink, and communicate with each other. And it's really great for me to know that not only in China, but in Cuba, you also have this kind of censorship. Although it's not so visible, it's more like invisible censorship. But it makes me feel that my own creation is not that hard. So really, thanks for today's talk, today's conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. Although I'm not a filmmaker, but I really learned a lot from all of you and from all of yours personal experience dealing with your own difficulties and the dilemmas. So yeah, I think the censorship is definitely a universal topic. It's everywhere in the world. So from like that in Cuba and in China, it's like it's something. It's quite big. It's like an elephant in the room, and everyone can see it, and everyone is trying to fight against it. And also, I think in the democratic world, we have to be aware of that. The tyranny of the majority. They're also facing a different kind of censorship. So basically, this topic is very, very universal, and I think as long as we can go to a certain depth of our own dilemma, we can dig into a certain depth, and eventually we can meet at some point, and we can share, we can exchange our thoughts, and we can be each other's beacon. We can be each other's inspiration. Although we have not a similar situation, but we could be inspirational for each other.
I just wanted to also just to say thank you, and it's been so interesting hearing about your experiences and thinking together about these contexts and how it works. And I think there's so much more that we could explore, and that hopefully some of us will continue exploring in terms of thinking comparatively about how independent cinema functions across contexts. And I just think that INSTAR, I hope that can continue to be this kind of space that can facilitate the beginnings of transnational communities of filmmakers and film lovers, because I think it's really important. So thank you.
Well, thank you all, and I hope to see you soon.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
Good night to Annie.
Be safe. Yeah. Take care.